So, hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, welcome. Hello, Cosmos.
Hi, Ricardo. How are you?
I'm fine.
Staying healthy?
Yes. What
Excellent.
about you? Everything is fine
Staying
over there?
healthy. As good as we can get, you know?
Yeah, sure. So, we are starting our first edition of the online debates that comes from a partnership between NACAC and Soccer Hub. So, on the next 3 days, we'll be having here 2 debates per day for about 45 minutes to 1 hour. On behalf of Soccer Hub, I would like to thank NACAC once again for trusting our services and trusting our way of doing things. Once again, I believe that it's going to be very fruitful for everyone that is attending. This is a live event. So as you know, you will be able to ask questions, just write on the chat box the question that you would like to be asked to one of our speakers, and Cosmos, that will be moderating this panel, will do it. So before we start, I just want you to click on the like button if you can see me and hear me well. And also, please introduce some information about yourselves on the chat box, the country that you are based in, and what kind of job do you have, so we can adapt a bit more our conversation. So Cosmos, thank you again. Thank you for the cooperation of NACAC, and the panel will be yours, okay?
Ricardo, thank you. We appreciate the opportunity. This is a great way to, especially during these times, to keep people in the know.
Okay, so I'm going to introduce Joey Lombardi and also Jay Bindi. In this conversation, we'll be discussing the best way to attack, possession, or counterattack. Cosmos, see you in 45 minutes.
See you then.
See you, Ricardo.
Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. First and foremost, I hope you and your families are all well, and that we take care of what needs to be taken care of in terms of priority over this difficult time, and hopefully it passes. We can be back on the training pitches as soon as possible. Folks, I'd like to introduce our 2 panelists. I'll go to my notes here first. Jay, you've been stuck with me before, and Jay, let me pull up your bio here, is a former Ottawa FC Fury Academy coach in a whole bunch of ages, first team analyst, and currently the Ottawa South United League Ontario staff coach. Also currently works with the Austin Bold FC as their analyst and opposition scout, and has had coaching internships all over the place: FC Porto, Academica, Fenerbahce, Besiktas, Torre de Setúbal, and Manyaspor. Also has a coaching experience in terms of licensing with the FAW, and is a UEFA B candidate. Joey, who hasn't been stuck with us before, although we've met several times, and the last time was several years ago, has a storied history working with the Rex programs, worked with Ontario Soccer and Canada Rex programs for the male-female sides, and prior to his current role with Brampton as the Director of Coaching and Player Development. Joey, did I get that right?
I was, I'm currently Director of Player and Coach Development for Brampton
FC. Okay, and then he was with Canada Men's Soccer Program, and he's Director of he also holds a Canadian A and a USSFA or USAA, depending on how you frame it now. So we're dealing with loads of experience, guys, so we're counting on you to let us know what your experience tells us in different situations. And our topic today is the best way to attack, possession, or counterattack. Obviously, it's a loaded question, and it's meant to be that way because people oftentimes think, well, it's one or the other. Others will say it's both. Some of the things that I'd like us to start off with, and I'll start off with this question, and gentlemen, jump in, and I'll start the first one with Joey, and then Jay, please respond as well. What are the most effective tactics that make counterattacking a useful approach to scoring goals? So Joey, we'll start with you, if you would, please.
I think you can't separate counterattack from the defensive organization. I think that's a big piece. So how you defend will then springboard your counterattack. So I feel like if you want to vacate space in the opponent's half, defending in a low block will force the opponent to attack at a higher point on the pitch, which then, once you've won the ball, and the aim in a medium to low block is to try to win the ball back in the middle third. And then from that point of view, you then have space in the opponent's half you probably want to have your front three in positions where they can already trigger your counterattack. And I always like to have a designated link player, probably my attacking midfielder, that I want to find as my first point in the transition to then springboard my counterattack. So I say how you set up in your defensive shape, probably a medium block's an effective way to then allow you, once you've won the ball in the middle third, to have space in the opponent's half to find your link player and then find your next phase of transition in behind the back line of the opponent.
Super. Jay, any thoughts to add? And based on what you consistently look at film, do you find that there's anything different in the conversation you would like to add, or anything that you would say based on your experience with certain opponents that you've coached against over the course of the last several years?
No, I think Joey made a lot of good points that I would have said too if I went first. So I agree with a lot of the points he said. I think it's super important to have that, like Joey said, inside your defensive organization. I like to think of you always have in the back of your mind attacking when you defend and vice versa. So inside your defensive organization, you do have that player for reference, your counter reference, and usually sometimes it's a number 9. It could be a number 10, like Joey said, that you most often than not look for in that transition moment to counter. One thing that I've noticed that we look at trends a lot, especially in the North American game, and I think Joey can relate as well, working with the national team, is trends in our part of the world. A lot of similarities in areas to exploited counter, and I find in the USL and even watching in the MLS, most often than not, those are in the wide areas. Because it's a trend for teams to play with attacking fullbacks, and fullbacks push up high. So you do have that area to exploit, going that transition moment to counter, using those wide areas.
Excellent. Thank you. Question, fellas. Let's say you have a program that you're coaching against, and the for lack of a better word, is a modified 4-3 with a 4-2-3-1, a 1-4-2-3-1. And they push you, and oftentimes it's based on your first or second pass and where you're looking to play. In teams pressing you high in those areas where you draw them in, and here's where the conversation might take a bit of a slant. We're a possession-based program. We want to try and draw players in, so we're playing possession in our third or our first block, drawing players in. Where do you see your first exit or entry pass coming in? Because oftentimes when they play that way and they press that way, they'll block your first, second, and third option. Do you tend to play a longer ball, a penetrating pass in possession, looking for a target if your 10 is not available, looking for a 9? Or do you play into a slotted area either side of the center circle where there's a space that might be available to play into? What do you think, and again, it's a loaded question, what do you think is a good way to bypass the pressure safely, especially when you're not dealing with professional level players, maybe dealing with a U14 girls or boys program or U16 girls or boys program? Jay, I'll start with you on this one, if you would, please.
Yeah, I think first that comes in your preparation. So I think when you are doing your preparation, and we'll use that example of a U14 team, we just have to communicate and have your players understand where spaces may arise, and it's understanding space and compensation and how to utilize that space. So always in football, we always look guys to find vertical passes and see where we can break lines. So if those things are there, then we have to allow our players to identify those moments and execute those actions. So I think it's understanding, Cosmos, to your players, is where pockets of spaces might open up, because the game is going to present so many different scenarios that might be available, and it's just helping our players understand and define what spaces are available to break that, like you said, that high pressure. If the space is in central areas, if the space is in wide areas, so it all comes in your preparation, I think.
Excellent, thank you, Joey. Anything to add or throw in your experience with the Excel and the Rex programs and what you've seen with the national programs as well?
Yeah, so what we'll look at is, how's the opponent pressing? Is it with a front 2? Is it with a front 3? Is it just a lone 9 that's chasing and hunting the center backs? Because depending on their setup, we always try to create a +1. So if they're pressing with 2, we want to have 3 in the build-up, in that first line of build-up. Then it obviously allows to play with low risk and find the free player to then look to play vertical, look to break lines. If they're playing with a low 9, then we'll look to use the center backs to take out that one forward, and then engage space and look to play forward. So we look at that quite a bit, and we have the principle of +1. And then the other piece is, where's our overload? Is it on the ball side or the weak side? Because if it's on the ball side, we'll look to progress down there. If it's not, we'll always have an option to switch the point of attack.
Excellent, thank you. Now, for those who are listening, you're finding that professional coaches work this way, and not just dealing with U14s or U16, it's something to do at the highest levels. You don't just go out there and play. And so there's a lot of tactical involvement here. And some of the biggest problems teams face when they look at this is, I'm forced to possess and play a certain way to come out of the back. And so, sidebar question, Joey, what do you think technique and how big a role technique has in trying to play out of the back if you're trying to counterattack? Teams pressing high, they're going to hunt and chase with 2 strikers, let's say, playing a 4-4-2 as an example, and they're coming at us. How important is it for your backs to be able to make that consecutive pass, to break a line, to find a vertical pass? What do you do in terms of technique training for them? And again, we can refer to a U12, 14, 16 age category. If not a professional level player, they would probably be doing the same thing, but not at the same repetition gauge. What do you suggest, or what do you recommend in doing a proper training to teach this type of work?
So you look at the counterattack, obviously depending on where you win the ball back, it's normally anywhere from short bursts of 6 seconds till you get the goal, or from 10 to 15 seconds. But within that time, everything's done at high speed, high tempo, whether it's high speed running with the ball, high speed movement, high speed technique. So if you are training your team from the technical level to prepare to play a counterattack style, I'd recommend doing things at a high tempo, high speed, and with lots of movements. And obviously then that impacts the quick decisions you have to make in that moment, because it's a short window. Because if you don't exploit the counterattack at speed, the opponent will get into their block, they'll get organized, and you miss the opportunity.
Super. Jay, from a tactical analysis, and again, you're dealing with programs in the USL, what do you see when the players that are being pressured high and heavy, what do you see them doing that provides them high levels of success, beating the lines, outside of what Joey has said? Can you add anything to that, or is there anything else that you see from a tactical analysis that might shed some light on this for coaches who are listening in?
I think, well, for first, it's a very, very crucial component that Joey mentioned, is doing things at a high tempo, because teams are getting so good at pressing at a high tempo and pressing with very good lines and very understanding of space and awareness. So I think the high tempo thing is absolutely crucial, no matter what tactical idea. When it comes to more of ideas, based on your question towards me, I think it's just in their positioning. I think it's important, especially now with the new goal kick rule. I think it adds a little bit of a more dynamic in terms of how you build up from the back if you wanted to do a short build up. So understanding and pretty much arriving into spaces and positions at the right time, I think, is crucial when it comes to something that we look at anyways on how teams would press us. Is okay, as soon as the first pass is played, what are the trends, what are the movements of their pressure, and what spaces open up that our players could move into positions. But it doesn't work without, like Joey said, high tempo action. So as soon as that first ball is played and they start to press, let's say their 9 comes out, a space opens up central, for example, our player has to have the right, the moment and get the right, arriving at the right time in that position to break that first initial line of pressure.
Excellent, thank you. Fellas, Jay, the first one's to you then, please. I'd like to talk about decision-making and decision-making based on your personnel. So we have let's say a U16 girls team. and they're playing in a very competitive championship. And the young ladies have a lot of pace, a lot of tempo, and they are struggling to link passes together. Obviously, you're going to work during training sessions on their passing. When you're looking at decision-based movements based on your personnel, what do you look for in players, and what do you teach players in a counter-attacking scenario? And in your scenarios, do you use overload to make it a little more realistic in terms of what you do in a game? And I'll start with Jay on this one, and then I'll push to Joey following.
Yeah, I think it's super important that the decision making is crucial, and I think you have to either have or instill in your training programs throughout your trainings is that freedom of expression and not having robotic players, especially if we're going to talk specifically about counterattacks, because I find those transition moments are very chaotic. I call it a little bit of organized chaos when you're in control. So it's a little bit of unpredictability. So you have to have those players that could make decisions in those chaotic moments that could present so many different things that you can't specifically recreate in your trainings. Although you could show trends and ideas, you have to kind of play with that repetition of letting the game present scenarios as the exercise happens in your training, and kind of showing the players, okay, what kind of things do we see in this scenario, and not instilling the answer in their head and making it robotic, but allowing them to express and, okay, you know what, coach, in this moment, this is what I see in this counter. This is the type of run I see. This is the type of spaces that I see. And just kind of giving the players in the training a lot of different scenarios, but not making them robotic, I think is the most important thing. Allowing them to be free, but putting them in creating scenarios that will present things naturally, I think is super important. And that will I think will improve their decision making and counterattack, because they will have experienced multiple different scenarios in their trainings, but they also know that they have the freedom of themselves to express their decision making based on what they see and they feel in that moment.
Okay, thank you. Joey, anything to add? Any comments?
Yeah, kind of what you were saying about like how do you design sessions to work on transition play, counterattacking, and a common one that I've used many times and seen at different clubs is it initially starts with a 3v2, and then the team that's defending with the 2, they have 2 players just on the outside of the perimeter of the game that once they've recovered the ball, they now enter in. So it goes from a 3v2 to now the 2 defenders transitioning to a 4v3 upon a regain. And it's a very effective activity, because again, they always have that one free player by the design of the session that they need to find in the transition moment, which will allow you to get counterattacks. And then bringing it into game scenarios, I think it's an important theme that you let the sessions flow. To get that transition moment, it has to flow from in possession, out of possession, transition, has to flow through the 4 moments. And I find coaches sometimes can get caught stopping the sessions too much, and they kill the transition. So when their teams go into games, they've not been trained to think quickly the moment the ball's been won or lost. And I think that's a key piece. And something that I've done in trainings is while the game's going on, I'll hold a ball in my hand, and while they're playing, I might put a new ball into the game. They have to react to that ball now, which again works on the quick thinking, switching from in possession, out of possession, or vice versa.
I think can I add to that, Cosmos, really quick?
Please.
I think Joey, you hit it on the dot there, and that's a common practice that in my coach education and something that I practice on a daily basis is every training exercise to have that element of transition and not kill the transition. And the second ball thing, I think, is very, very effective in certain exercises, just to allow that element of unpredictability to the players and have them react to the second ball, whether you throw it at the attacking team, defending team, in the air, on the ground. I think it adds that element of creating those moments that just come naturally.
Super. fellas, I think it's a clear indication of experienced coaches at the professional and national levels of knowing when to step back and hands off and let the players play, because too often times we see this happen, and the training session has to be done this way, and we don't allow the kids to express themselves, or the players to express themselves. So guys, we spent the first 20 minutes or so chatting about some topics and questions. I'd like to bring in some conversation revolving around some mainstream professional programming, national programming, international programming in terms of games. I'll start with something recent, and we'll look at the EPL, and I'll take a two-zone look at this. Leicester City won the EPL several years ago in a much unexpected form, and their style of play was very much a counter-attacking style of play, absorb the pressure, and having the luxury of having some pacey players up top, Vardy being one of them, would counter-attack and run past defenders and look for that vertical ball going forward. Then they ran into some trouble most recently, and last year they made some managerial changes, and so now they have Brendan Rodgers at the helm, and they are again experiencing a great deal of success. And by doing so, they are allowing certain things to happen, but they're a team that also likes to press as well. And so what I'm finding is, in a professional format, teams that are of the highest level can do both, obviously. They know when to sit back and absorb the pressure and try and draw teams in and press high and win in the neutral zone, if you will, and go forward. Looking at a team like Leicester, the components that make them successful most recently are that they're using their personnel well, and something that Jay and Joey both alluded to about knowing who to play where and having that player and looking for these type of training environments where people recognize what they need to do. So if you haven't got a Vardy, if you haven't got someone who's a pacey player up top like a Marcus Rashford, I'm alluding to the EPL at this point, having got a player that's going to make those penetrating runs off a counterattack, how do you counter then? And you touched on it a little bit, Joey and Jay, that you look for flank players getting involved in the attack. Are you proponents of or fans of the minute we obtain possession in a counterattack that we get numbers forward, or do you have a set 3 or 4 that will always counter depending on where you would go? And again, it's a loaded question. I've won the ball in my neutral third, my end of the neutral third, and we've got someone up top who's a great target for it, but doesn't have a lot of pace, so we're not going to beat someone with the ball going past them. How many players do I engage in the attack? Do I engage my outside backs? Do I engage my 8? Do I engage my 7? Do I engage my 11? Is my 9 only acting as a target? Does my 10 make late runs through? All those kinds of questions that I'm sure you deal with consistently. And Jay, you've seen these from a tactical analysis. I'll let you start off on this one, please, if you would, and talk to us a little bit about what you think if you haven't got someone with pace up top that you can beat with one ball after winning the ball in the neutral third. Do you play a target and then engage 2, 3, 4 players going forward? What does your analysis suggest based on your experience?
I think, well, first you alluded to some good points before the question is having the right profile of players. And sometimes people are in scenarios where they don't have the luxury of profiling hundreds of players. They just have what they have. So going into that question, I think you just have to be creative in what you have. And if you're giving the scenario of you don't have a pacing 9, but he's more of a target player, you could look, and I think we touched upon this at the beginning, to play your first or second pass to that target player and have late coming runs, like you said, and it's all based on the specific situation, but you could have, if you play with double 8s coming from their zone and making penetrating runs, and it's hard for, especially in chaotic moments, it's hard for defenders to defend players coming from different zones and different lines. I think the back 4, is generally looking at taking care of the attacking players, and the midfields are marking the midfielders. But if you have late players, for example, if you have double 8s, if you link to your number 9 and have 2 double 8s running past him to have a little combination or link-up play, I think that could be your solution. Another one is you could just A very simple one is you could just play into your 9 to feet, and he could play back to a midfielder, and he could just bop it into a flank for a winger. I think it all depends on the situation, but again, in your trainings, showing your players and allowing them to experience those different scenarios, to allow them to experience linking up with their 9 with late runners coming from in behind, linking up with your 9 to have players running into the wide areas, so that when the game time comes, in that organized, chaotic moment, they've experienced different things and they have that freedom of expression to try. And maybe there's multiple, maybe there's a run in a wide area and a late run coming in, and the player will go back to decision making, will have to make the right decision based on the opposition. Do they have 3 players back? Is their center back out of position? Is their right back completely out of the play? So I think it all comes down to situational, but again, allowing your players to have the freedom and in training sessions to have that, let the game naturally bring those moments out so they can explore different moments.
Super. Joey, your experience, and if I can tag this by saying, let's take our women's national program. And Christine Sinclair, icon, is not a pacey player, not anymore. And so she receives the ball. We look to her to get that ball. How do we play then as a national program and have the ball delivered into our target, who we know is going to be marked tightly, consistently, because she's that dangerous, knowing that they don't want her to get that first ball, and teams will make that effort? Do we support players like that, both internally and externally, get runs past her? Has it been your experience in coaching and involved in the national program that we get players running past, or do we want to get the ball out of pressure and then maintain a level of balance and then play through them? Again, we've seen both depending on who our opponents are. You play a team that's particularly high pressured like the Americans, and they're on you 24/7. You might play a team that's going to sit back a little bit more after you beat their press, if you will, and then we try and organize around them. What do you find most effective, or what have you found most effective in working with the Excel and the Rex programs and the national programs?
So for just to the point about let's say you got a forward like Sinclair, whose decision making is of high quality, and her, obviously she's a player you want to get on the ball as often as possible. So if we feel like she's like the center backs have managed her well, we'll have her come in a false 9 role. Well, she'll come deeper in midfield areas, and we'll look to get her on the ball. Because again, once she gets the ball and she's turned facing forward, she can find different options and definitely penetrate in our attacks. Also, too, she's great to link with. The way the team's set up, they've got a lot of pace in wide areas. You know, just an example, Jeanine Becky's a very dynamic winger who complements our front 3 attack. And then we've got midfielders who bring different profiles. You've got the Jessie Fleming and the Sophie Schmitz, who are very decisive with the runs off the ball, who can, you know, make those midfield runs to get beyond the opponent's back line. Again, that offers us different options. But yeah, very, very much with Sinclair, you know, she's adapted well to the modern game and found different ways to continue to be effective, you know, against teams like the U.S. In terms of, you know, in the Rex program, similar, we look at the players we have, because that always dictates how you structure, whether it's the possession buildup or our transition phase. One thing that we have in the identity is, regardless if we're playing counterattack or possession, is to complete the second pass. It's a big thing. So not only the first pass, but the second pass, because normally that's what happens. You complete the first one, the opponent's trying to counter press, and we cough it up. So it's teaching them the second plus pass completion habit, and that's a principle that we use across the whole system.
Super, great insights, gentlemen. Let's talk about a different team now. We'll look on the men's end, and we'll look at the EPL again. And I'd like to talk about Wolverhampton, the Wolves, and under new guidance these past couple of years, a manager who has a goalkeeping background. They are a high-level opponent, and they take down the Giants quite frequently, and they like to play. They will try and play through. They're a team that, even though their levels of success compared to the top 2 or 3 are great, against the rest of the league are quite good. And when I say quite good, they have measured success against most opponents because they like to possess the ball, but they also sit back and then counter, and they counter at pace and speed. And so they're an example of a team, and this will be the first example we'd like to talk about, of how a team has come up under new management, and they are able to play both possession and counterattack. And it leads to a conversation that we'll talk about a little bit further on with regards to the Dortmunds and how they become Liverpool and the Barcelonas and the Atletico Madrids. But if we could talk about a team, and I use Wolves as an example, that likes to do both. Joey, if you have a team that likes to do both, your team is able to both press and is both able to counterattack and likes to possess the ball. At what point in a game do you try and initiate this? Do you tell your team, or do you organize your team, or do you suggest your team, or have your team captain or your leaders on the field say, listen, it's time for us to push forward, it's time for us to press, it's time for us to do whatever we need to do? Do you find that early in a game is a good place to put high-level pressure on and try and benefit from mistakes that opponents are making? Or we like to press later on in the game where there's fatigue that sets in? It might be both. Again, it's just an operational question that as a coach or coaches might be asking themselves, well, we can't press the whole game because we're going to get fatigued. And we can't sit back the whole game and withstand the pressure. What do we do? So from a professional, national, international perspective, what would you suggest, and what is your history suggesting?
Generally, and I say generally because like climate could play a factor. Are we playing the third game in a group stage and we, already achieved progression to the next phase, or is it a must-win game? These are factors obviously that will impact our tactics. But in a general point of view, we like to press the opponents early, disrupt their rhythm. So even if let's say their favorite style is the possession and they like to build up from the back, our goal would be to try to disrupt their rhythm and press them early, rather than letting them settle into their preferred playing style.
Okay. Jay, what from a tactical analysis perspective, having dealt with the USL over this past year plus, what do you see and what are your recommendations?
First, me from a personal philosophy point, I think I view it as the way that football is being trended in which direction. I think, and you got to use a good example of Wolves, is you have to be multidimensional and your players have to be multidimensional. I believe that you can't just be, if you want it called possession, or you can't just be counter, or you can't just be high press, or you can't just be low block. I think you have to have fluidity, and that sits inside of of course, your principles in all 4 moments of the game. So I think you have to have the ability to do all throughout the game, and the ability to work on all in your training. I think for if I'm going to look at the USL, just the trends of the league, I think it's a little bit similar to the MLS, where it's a bit more open and a bit more vertical, but you still have to be able to be dynamic and be fluid in those moments. And I think something that we do in Austin, based on the profile of players that were brought in, we have that ability to be fluid, where some games we could go away and high press, where generally teams it's not a big trend. And we have the ability to be at home and be pushed into a low block and be able to do that. And we have the ability to build with short passes, and we have the ability to play in a little bit more quick counter, you could call it. So I think it's super important that teams that want success, and I think the way that football is being trended today is you have to be fluid, and I think that's a great example of Wolves and Nuno Santos, someone that I studied a little bit of his work. He was able to do that, and understanding the Premier League, buying players like Traore and Jimenez to fit that mold of okay, I'm going to the Premier League. It's not FC Porto where I'm playing in the Portuguese league. I'll need players like this, so I think that's super important as well.
Super, thank you. Now, viewers or listeners of a certain vintage, old like me, would remember the '74 World Cup and how the Dutch through Rinus Mikkels revolutionized the way the game was looked at, certainly, and had high levels of success, even though they hadn't won the World Cup, with the likes of Cruyff and Neeskens and so on and so forth. And they tended to possess the ball deeper and drop players deeper so they could attack in numbers going forward, and it caused all kinds of problems for their opponents. And then the next group that played that way, that caused them grief again, was the 78 Dutch program. I'll move forward to the 82 World Cup, where you have the Italians playing the Brazilians. And it's a huge World Cup where there are high expectations for both, but Brazil is expected to do particularly well. All-star lineup, great individual players. And you have a team that's a very high-level possession team, and then have a team that's sitting back Catenaccio style that the Italians played at some point, but also have someone like Gentile who's marking Zico out of the game full time, and you have players that are marking and giving Adair some flair on the side. And those games are examples of how team strategy against superior opponents in many's mind provide a positive result. Now, if we look at teams coming forward, and for our viewers who maybe aren't familiar with those names and those dates, you might look at something within the last decade and look at a program like a Barcelona with the culmination of their rivalry. It's becoming even bigger with Real Madrid, and Real Madrid's success against Barcelona, playing against the tiki-taka, to coin their phrase, and having Barcelona play possession in certain parts of the field, and Real Madrid saying it's okay for you to play possession there. When do you, as a coach, as a manager, as a trainer, organize your players and say, listen, we're willing to give up this space and let them play here because we don't want to get drawn out? Possession, like many, is a cat and mouse game. Where possessing one way and counter-attacking allows you to win the ball where they don't want you to win the ball. Can you give me examples of matches that you've coached in, or matches that you've analyzed, that you have particularly had success in sitting in certain blocks and then counterattacking, and or possessing specifically and beating a counterattack, beating a press, so that you can give our viewers an example of how this happens in real world, and then maybe you can relate it to. I'll relate it to a U12 team that I work with sometimes as well, and the joy and success of getting that first pass past the first bank of players. Joy, we'll start with you on this one, if we would, please. From your experiences, is there anything that you've done or any adjustments you've made based on my ramblings?
Yeah, it's use some good examples there. The Italy-Brazil 82, Paul Rossi his hat-trick against Brazil in that match. Very much a transition style, because Brazil was a very elaborate team in their attacking and had a lot of flair and possession-based approach, which did leave them exposed in transition. So, and Italy came up on top that day. Now, I can see similarities between the Italy of 82 and the Leicester City that won the Premier League. Paulo Rossi, Jamie Vardy, very strong in defending in a block, obviously with pace up front. If I had to say in the last 10 years, a team that stood out to be very effective in the counterattack and got huge success would be the Inter Milan of 2010, Mourinho's Inter Milan, and how they were able to play with long periods without possession, but stay very organized in the low block, but then we're very dynamic in the transition. Obviously with Samuel Eto'o, Wesley Sneijder as the link player in the attack. They had Stankovic as well as in midfield that could join the attack. Melito, who was also another dynamic type of forward. So the team was very much built around defending in the low block and the transition. And, they won games where they had 30% ball possession, but, we're beating the likes of Bayern Munich, Barcelona. And I think their philosophy was let the opponent have the ball, because when you have ball possession, all of us, regardless of what age group we're coaching, want our team shape to be, wide and long, create a big shape. And what happens is when you create that depth and width, the moment you lose the ball, the opponent has space where they can hurt you. And that was the philosophy of Mourinho, was let them have the ball, let them push their fullbacks up, let them leave themselves exposed for the transition. And he was very much set up for that. And I think the key when you analyze the Mourinho team at Inter in 2010 was the role of Wesley Sneijder. He was the guy that they always looked to get on the ball in the transition moment because he had the ability to think quickly in transition. He could play that killer pass, and he had a high game IQ. So again, working with the profiles, but that's the extreme example of a team that plays in the counterattack. In terms of watching teams like the Dutch of '74 and '78, they modernized the role of interchanging and rotations. They brought, like Jay said, the fluidity of the game to a different level and have left an imprint. The Cruyff philosophy, as they say now, from Nicholas to Cruyff.
Super, outstanding. Jay, anything to add? Anything from your experiences with Ottawa or with FC Austin?
Yeah, I think like Joey said, it's they're teams were built to, some teams are built a certain way, and I think in Austin we come up against teams that are built a certain way, and certain coaches, obviously because they have the luxury of profiling hundreds of players, can really implement their ideas. So I think I'll use an example. Phoenix Rising is one of the big dogs in the USL. And they have a fantastic roster of top players. And when we come up against Phoenix, it's always so hard to build a scouting report against them, and how are we going to exploit them, because their players individually are just very good. But we try to find their weak points, and they're a team that will most often not just dominate the ball, so they'll always have more ball possession than the other team, but they like to have numbers forward. And as quality of players they are, at the end of the day, they're still human beings. So even if they're top players for that league, if they're flying forward, it leaves a lot of spaces in behind, and not necessarily even to counterattack, but just to break and eliminate players out of the play, to put yourself in a better stage of offensive organization in their half. I was recently on a webinar with Mark Lowry, who coaches the El Paso, and he made a very good point of our trends in our league. Attacking players are generally lazy in transition, especially if you play in a 4-3-3, or 2 wide players are generally, they use the term lazy. So in that you find areas, okay, like Joey said, the first pass is there, but the second pass has to be completed, but it has to go in these areas, and it's got to be there. And if not, it just becomes a game of transition. And something that a phrase that I use a lot with my players is, we don't want to be countered on a counter, because that's just even more chaotic. So if you try, if you have an idea of counter, you play to your 9, that first one is good. Maybe the second one might be good, but then the third one is lost. Well, then you're exposed in 2 different ways, because you're caught in like a limbo land of, I'm not in defensive organization, I'm not in transition, and the few seconds are a little bit like, I don't know. And I find a lot of goals in the USL come from that limbo of, I don't know what to do.
I think that's a hugely valid point, and something that I think Liverpool exploits quite frequently in the run from last year and this year, with the gegen pressing, the counter pressing. We've lost the ball, we're going to press the loss again. We're going to catch them out consistently. I know that I try, and again, I'm going to refer to your expertise when I look at playing these transition games. Again, counterattacking and transition aren't the same thing, but they're part and parcel of the same idea. We counterattack by allowing people and drawing them into the space we want them to attack, and then we transition, we win the ball, and move forward and go accordingly. I'm playing in a league that has 7v7 plus a keeper, and many coaches will say, well, how do I teach transition to a bunch of 10-year-olds? How do I teach transition? How do I teach counterattack? How do I teach possession? And all these questions come up, because that's why all these websites have all these great games and ideas and training sessions in them. But I don't want to talk about the games. I want to talk about mentality. I want to talk about mindset. What mindset do you try and instill in younger players when you're teaching them how to counterattack, and also in terms of a possession game? We'll start with Jay on this one and then finish up with Joey.
Yeah, I think when we talk about youth development, and I think those ages are super crucial to get those teachings, like you said, Cosmos. And I think it's just instilling the behaviors. I think it's super important in youth development to ensure and to make sure there's emphasis on the behaviors of in those transition moments of loss of possession or regain of possession, because to begin a counterattack, first of all, you need to have those behaviors of that aggressive mentality to be in a counter. So right away, you're looking for your players to be aggressive and high tempo, because you can't counter slow. It doesn't exist. So I think in those transition moments where you recover the ball, I think inside your training sessions and you need to instill in those young players those behaviors, not to switch off, not to be a little bit dip into a little bit of a one gear. I think I use this term a lot when I step into to coach the young ones, is like you think of a car and like you think of changing of the gears. So right away you recovered the ball in that transition moment and there is an opportunity to counter and you want to counter, you got to go to gear 6 and it's got to be bang bang, and the behaviors have got to be aggressive. I got to have good body orientation in a vertical sense. I got to have the tempo of the ball needs to move quick. So I think there's a really, really big emphasis when coaching those youth players in transition. When you recover, you want to counter, is those behaviors and those attitudes of, I win the ball and I'm hungry. Like, let's go hurt them.
Very good. Thank you. Joey, your thoughts?
Yeah, building on that, I think you're right, Jay. You have to build the behaviors, and also you have to teach players how to recognize the cues. Is the counterattack on, or do we need to go back and get into structured build-up because the opponent's done well to stay balanced? And I think that's you look at the modern game, it's a balance always. Even when you're attacking, you never want to be unbalanced, that where you can get exposed in transition. So it's teaching players the cues, when the counter versus when to go into a structured build-up. Because they have to have that game awareness.
Super.
Yeah, I agree.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you. For me, it's always fun to do this because you learn something every time you're online. Certainly, we could talk for hours.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we have to get ready for our next group. Again, Jay, Joey, thanks very much. I want to make a note of indicating that these are all free thanks to Soccer Hub and our association with them, and that we are looking forward to an April 29th online conversation with our former national team men's coach, Tony Waiters, and some of the players that played on the 86 team. And we can call it the road to the 86 World Cup. Call it whatever you like. We'd love to have you join us at that time. And again, remember that these are all provided free via Soccer Hub, and that if you would like to join, by all means, check us out on our website.
Guys, thank you very much. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Joey. Thank you, Cosmos. Once again, guys, see you soon. Bye.
Thank you all.
Thanks, fellas.
Thank you very
Be well.
much.